licensing subcommittee. I must inform both members and members of the public from the outset that this meeting is being live streamed to the Council's Facebook page and YouTube channels. I will begin by allowing both members and officers to introduce themselves for the benefit of members of the public. So I'll start off by saying, hi, I'm Dan Brown. I am ward member for Wembury and Brixton, and I am also chairman of licensing at Southampton District Council. Councillor Holway.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I'm Tom Holway. I'm ward member for Ermington and Ugborough, and I'm vice chair of the licensing committee.
Councillor Pannell.
I'm Guy Pannell. I'm one of the 2 ward members for the South Brent ward, and I am a member of the licensing committee.
Thank you. Mrs. Stacey.
Thank you. My name is Naomi Stacey, and I'm the licensing specialist for South Hams District Council.
Thank you. And Mr. Fairburn.
Hello, I'm David Fairburn. I'm Head of Legal Services and Monitoring Officer for South Hams District Council.
Thank you. And we've got also got Mr. White, who's from Democratic Services, who's acting as gatekeeper and timer in chief this afternoon for our help. So thank you for that. So the format of this meeting will be as follows. We'll get to the agenda in a second, but the licensing specialist, Mrs. Stacey, will present her report, after which members of the committee will have a chance to ask questions. We'll then go to the applicant to speak, after which point, again, members will be able to ask questions of the applicant. Finally, we will give the objectors the chance to make their representations, after which, again, members will have the chance to ask questions. I'd also like to remind those speaking this afternoon that the committee can only make decisions based on the 4 licensing objectives. These are the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, the prevention of public nuisance, the protection of children from harm. I therefore request that those speaking keep their comments to these material considerations. After we've considered the representations by members of the public, the committee will then adjourn/retire to consider its decision, and that'll be myself, Councillor Holway, Councillor Pannell, and we will be advised by Mr. Fairburn to ensure that we come to a legally sound decision. Each speaker this afternoon is allowed up to 20 minutes to speak, and I would again please remind you to stick to licensing objectives. You know, this isn't a planning meeting, so please stick to the licensing objectives. And then if we've made our decision within about 45 minutes or so, depending on how long it takes, we'll come back into this meeting to tell you other decisions we've come to. In the event that it looks like we're going to take a bit longer, we will finish the meeting and you'll be advised by Mr. White or Mrs. Stacey, and the decision that we come to will be emailed to you and to those who have been making representations within 5 working days. I do hope that is all clear. So I will begin the meeting proper now. So I have item number 1 is division of the agenda. Members, I don't believe there's any need to divide the agenda items of business at this meeting. Item number 2 is declarations of interests. Members are invited to declare any personal or disclosable pecuniary interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in any of the items to be considered at this meeting today. So, any interest to declare, members? No, both Councillor Holway and Pannell are shaking their head, and I have no interest to declare. Moving on, item number 3. Application for a new premises licence at Rockfish Takeaway, 28 Lower Street, Dartmouth, TQ6 9am. So I'd like to hand over to Mrs. Stacey to introduce her report. Mrs. Stacey.
Thank you, Chairman. So the reason we're here today is to consider a new premises licence application for Rockfish Takeaway in Dartmouth. The application is for the sale of alcohol for consumption off the premises Monday to Sunday from 11 AM till 10 PM, and you will have seen the full copy of the application and the plan at Appendix A. The premises are located in Dartmouth, close to the Bayards Cove area and the Lower Ferry Slipway. Maps showing the location of that premises are at Appendix B. As you will have seen, we received 8 representations in relation to the application. Copies of these are at Appendix C. The main areas for concern relate to the prevention of public nuisance and the prevention of crime and disorder licensing objectives. Throughout all the representations, there are references to the potential for extra rubbish and litter in the local area due to current problems that are currently being experienced. There are other concerns that have been raised that customers may take off sales of alcohol to consume in the local area and the potential for increased antisocial behaviour, as well as nuisance from customers queuing outside and blocking the pavement. Any references in the representations to the need for another licensed premises in the area isn't relevant and cannot be taken into consideration. In addition, the owners can't be held responsible for toilet provision in the local area as they are a takeaway business, so no food and drink will be consumed on the premises. At page 11 of Appendix AI, which is the application form, you will see the conditions that were proposed by the applicant with their application. During the consultation period, the applicant provided us with some additional information concerning the situation with rubbish and waste, and also proposed 4 additional conditions which can be seen at Appendix D. This information and the proposed conditions were forwarded to everyone that had made a representation on the 22nd of March. So we did still have a few days left. So that was to 6 of those that had made the representation at that time. Of those, one of those parties decided to withdraw their representation subject to these proposals. 2 other parties confirmed that their representation still stood. And since that time, we've also had confirmation from another of the people that made a representation that they would also like to withdraw their representation subject to these changes. So in your representation list, Objection 8 and Objection 2 have been withdrawn subject to the proposed conditions. We received some additional information from Objector number 4 and from the applicant in response to their notices of hearing. This has been circulated to the subcommittee and to the applicant and is also available in the committee papers on the website. We have received no representations from any of the responsible authorities. So it's just a reminder that today, as you have mentioned earlier, that any decision must only be based solely on promotion of the 4 licensing objectives. Please let me know if you've got any questions.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Stacey. Councillors, have you any questions for the officer at this point? No? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we will now go to the applicant, who I believe is Mr. Hart. Is that correct, Mr. Hart? I don't guess so.
Just unmute myself. Well,
No,
I'm the representative of the applicant.
So you have 20 minutes on this occasion, which all other speakers will be given as well. Mr. White is acting as timekeeper today and will provide a gentle nudge when you're very close to your time. But otherwise, please do go ahead, sir.
Thank you, sir, and good afternoon. Mitch Tonks and Matt Prowse run the Rockfish chain of restaurants and have had the Rockfish takeaway in Dartmouth, which incidentally was formerly a pub building, since around 2011. The business is successful. It offers a takeaway menu containing sustainably caught fish from either the Rockfish boat or fish landed at Brixham, together with a soft drink menu containing water, juices and fizzy drinks. Primarily, this application is about satisfying customer demand. Quite regularly, customers at the takeaway ask if it's possible to buy a beer to drink with their fish and chips, and this application reflects that demand. Rockfish would like to be able to offer a tin of beer with fish and chips to their customers. They're not setting up a pub, they're not selling draft beer, they're not offering a full bar service, no spirits, they're not even proposing to sell wine at this stage. Possibly a bottle of wine in due course, but not wine by the glass. Simply tins of beer, locally sourced and brewed for Rockfish in conjunction with the Salcombe Brewery through an exclusivity deal. That's it. So hence we have a premises license application seeking just one licensable activity, the supply of alcohol between 11 AM and 10 PM daily. So not late hours. And in fact, very often the takeaway is closed by something like 9 PM. Now, my clients have 3 premises in the heart of Dartmouth, all opened between 10 and 13 years ago: the Seahorse, the Rockfish restaurant, and the Rockfish takeaway. They're totally committed to Dartmouth and serving residents and visitors alike. and they enjoy working with everyone in the community, trying to make Dartmouth a destination with a great mix of offerings. Having a premises licence, which would be a very small part of the trade in the takeaway, is just another part of that offer. And of course, everyone who visits one of their premises is likely to spend money in additional ways during their visit, be it for parking, taxis, ferries, shops, or in pubs. Now, there are currently 9 Rockfish premises along the south coast, and 8 of them have premises licences. The exception is the Dartmouth takeaway. The others are full restaurants in Plymouth, Torquay, Exeter, Exmouth, Weymouth and Poole, a restaurant and takeaway in Brixham, and the restaurant in Dartmouth, plus of course the Seahorse. So a total of 9 current premises licences under their management. I personally have dealt with the licensing for most of them, and having discussed this with my clients, we cannot recall ever having received any representations with regard to any of these premises licence applications. Nor have we received any objections to a number of variation applications over the years after the premises have been in operation. But more than that, and perhaps more pertinently, we can't recall ever having any police involvement with any of the Rockfish licences as they've been operated over the last 12 years or so. Not once has there been any instance of disorder requiring police involvement, nor have any concerns ever been expressed by the police or any of the authorities about the operation of the premises licence. This is down in good part to the impressive training regime for staff members, and I'm hoping that you'll hear more on this later from Mr. Prowse. One might ask, given the nature of this relatively minor application, why are there 8 representations here? Well, 6, as 2 have effectively been withdrawn as satisfied, subject to the conditions. Why is Dartmouth special? Well, we all know that Dartmouth is beautiful, although not without issues, but my clients are very used to running premises in sensitive and attractive areas. In Plymouth at Sutton Harbour, close to the National Marine Aquarium, and with a very large outside area, on Torquay Harbourside and within a cumulative impact area, on Exeter Quay, on Exmouth Seafront, on Weymouth Seafront, on the Harbourside in Poole. All of these areas have their attractions, but also in many ways their challenges. My clients are very well used to managing these sorts of situations. They also, of course, have both a restaurant, but also a takeaway, which has been licensed since 2015 at Brixham Harbour, just 5 miles from Dartmouth. There are plenty of bars, restaurants and takeaways in close proximity, used by locals and visitors alike, and not dissimilar to Dartmouth. Just like Dartmouth, they introduced the licence for the takeaway as a response to customer demand. They sell alcohol in the takeaway at the same price as within the restaurant. It's not cheap booze, it's restaurant price. Alcohol is no more than 10% of the takeaway's income. There have been no issues at all over the last 6 years. No waste complaints, no rubbish issues, notwithstanding a big seagull problem there. There have been no issues or hostility with the local pubs and the licensed trade. There's been no police involvement whatsoever. And when I engaged in informal consultation with the police prior to submitting this application, and incidentally it's the same police licensing officer looking after Dartmouth as Torbay, I received an email advising, I'm happy with the way Rockfish has been operating in Torquay and Brixham. Therefore, I'm satisfied with the conditions you outline below and don't envisage any other issues in respect of these premises. So, sir, I'd submit that this is compelling evidence in the context of virtually identical premises in a similar town just 5 miles away. So all in all, Dartmouth is not unique, and it's just not in my client's DNA to run a rowdy establishment or pub. These are food-led premises, and the majority of my client's premises have substantial food conditions. So within the application, as you've heard, is the usual operating schedule of proposed conditions. In order to assist, I've supplied them as a separate document. These conditions are very familiar to my client's operation as they exist in most of their licenses. So you'll have seen the usual CCTV condition, typical public safety condition, usual Challenge 25 and training conditions. An additional condition provides for a notice reminding patrons to use the litter bins and keep noise levels to a minimum. And of course, most significantly, we proposed a substantial food condition. Alcohol for consumption off the premises will only be sold at the same time as a substantial takeaway meal. This reinforces the fact that my clients run food-led operations where alcohol is never more than ancillary to food. But most importantly, this condition is identical to the substantial takeaway meal condition that has worked so successfully in Brixham and as referred to by the police. In other words, a beer can only be purchased with a takeaway, not on its own. Now, as your licensing officer has helpfully mentioned, during the representation period, we were updated with regard to the representations received, and those primarily concerned litter issues, but also the danger of glass use was mentioned. So taking the glass issue first, my clients are in any event phasing out glass bottle use from their operations. And accordingly, I advised your licensing officer that they would be, my clients that is, would be perfectly content to offer a standard no glass condition. Turning to litter, there's a lot to say on this subject, and I'll deal with the specific representation shortly. However, in the context of the additional conditions that were offered, Rockfish wanted to be flexible and willing to seek a solution to resolve the issue, and so instructed me to offer the 3 additional conditions that you have before you. Now, given time pressures, I don't have time to read those out in full, but in essence, condition 1 indicates the willingness to position bins in the area, and they're happy to put bins further afield if agreed by the council. Condition 2 confirms the willingness to have movable bins immediately outside, which will be taken in at closing time. And condition 3 demonstrates the willingness to ensure staff play their part in checking and clearing anything in the vicinity. In order to ensure compliance with these conditions, Rockfish have a very significant training and monitoring system called Flow Training, and Mr. Prowse will speak about this and the lifetime screenshot example that you have with your papers. Amongst a number of comments made to South Hams with these conditions were, firstly, Rockfish have already sponsored 4 council litter bins in the area at a cost of £4,000, 2 on the embankment, 1 in Bayards Cove, and 1 close to the entrance to the lower ferry. This was at the time of the opening of the takeaway, and my clients were told by South Hams that they couldn't have their own bins, but that they could sponsor additional South Hams bins, which is what they did. Secondly, there are issues with cars parking and blocking accesses in the area around the takeaway and the entrance to Bayards Cove. And interestingly, the area seems to have been missed from the usual parking restrictions in Dartmouth. Our clients, and indeed some other businesses in the area, would have no objection to that area being subject to parking restrictions. And your licensing officers confirm that these issues have been referred to the appropriate council departments. Thirdly, we advised of our client's intention to move the big red commercial bins from the side of the premises into a back area. This creates additional space and improves the look of the area and frees up space where our clients could place additional small litter bins in the immediate future, which they can monitor and clear as part of the monitoring of litter around the frontage of the premises. Now, this has been done by Rockfish, but not yet by the neighbouring Bayards Cove Inn, although they've advised that they will do so. So it was felt that these additional conditions were more than reasonable and proportionate in addressing the concerns set out in the representations. And that's been borne out to the extent that 2 of those who've made representations, Councillor Evans and Mr. Botterill, have indicated that the additional conditions adequately satisfy their concerns, and they're happy to withdraw their objections on the basis of these conditions. However, 6 objectors have not withdrawn their representations, so I'll turn to those specifically now. You will be relieved to hear that I don't intend to go through each representation individually, as there's a good deal of overlap. Instead, I'll pick up each of the licensing objectors in turn and address the issues raised collectively. I do need to say just a few words on the subject of need. As you've already been advised, any comments about need must be disregarded, and those representations are of no relevance. My clients have as much right to apply for permission to supply alcohol as any other business. Of course, it's no different to a pub selling takeaway fish and chips, which they all are. And my clients have absolutely no issue with that whatsoever. In fact, they positively welcome the choice that customers have with the range of venues across Dartmouth. So starting with the crime and disorder objective, there are just a couple of references in the representations. And what I must emphasise here is that the police have had no issues whatsoever with regard to the Brixham takeaway, hence no representations from them. Why would Dartmouth be more of a problem than Brixham? The substantial food condition and the restaurant price beer, which will most likely be around £3.95 a bottle, is not going to attract drinkers who'll just go into one of the many pubs. The odd 330ml beer with substantial food isn't going to result in rowdy behaviour nor aggression and fighting in queues, as has been suggested. A licensee asks who is going to be responsible for managing and preventing crime and disorder. Well, that will be the DPS, who will be Mr. Proust, who is well known to and friendly with that objector. Mr. Proust has significant experience in the licensed industry over 30 years, including in central London. And there's also a very experienced team of managers in Dartmouth, with people who've worked in the business for 9 or 10 years. The allegation concerning young and inexperienced staff with a senior person only arriving to cash up is completely untrue. Last year, the takeaway had a 49-year-old man running and working in the takeaway all summer. There's mention of the banned from one, banned from all network, I presume some sort of nightnet scheme. Well, Rockfish would be very happy to be included, but we have to remember that Rockfish isn't a pub and will only sell alcohol with substantial food in both venues in Dartmouth. There's a suggestion that someone who's intoxicated or troublesome will be served at Rockfish. Well, again, that's patently untrue. If someone's intoxicated, then they won't be served. Turning to public safety, there are just a couple of references to this objective. A couple to being close to the Lower Ferry. Well, yes, that's where the takeaway is, but it's not relevant to this application, as this is an off licence and the alcohol supplies will be consumed off the premises, whether it be outside sitting somewhere nice in Dartmouth or at home or at a holiday let or the like. There's a reference to drunk people gathering late at night obstructing traffic from the ferry. Well, I have to refer back to what I've already said about the substantial food condition and the hours of operation. It simply isn't this type of operation, as evidenced by Brixham. One person raises transport and parking issues, which I've already said are being taken up with the council and are outside my client's control. Fish Friday is mentioned, which is a very popular community evening when in fact Rockfish make barely any profit. These objectors are fully aware of the benefits as they've been customers on a Friday, but it's irrelevant to the premises licence application as there won't be any cheap alcohol available. A bottle of beer will be more expensive than the fish and chips. So quite simply, whether on Friday or any other day of the week, no one's going to be attracted to go to the Rockfish takeaway just to buy alcohol. They simply can't because of the food condition. So they'd only buy a beer because it's convenient and they're going to buy fish and chips anyway. Therefore, numbers won't be increased. And in addition, with reference to queues, which again won't be increased by virtue of the premises licence, a lot of the recent investment in the takeaway refit is to enable the business to process customers more quickly and more efficiently. They now have much improved fryers and equipment to speed up the operation, and they have a more manageable menu, all of which will help to reduce queues. So I move on now to public nuisance, and I've touched on a number of issues concerning litter already. One of the major concerns that my clients have is that there's no evidence whatsoever that most of the rubbish in the area has come from Rockfish as suggested. There are dozens of businesses in Dartmouth selling takeaway food and drink, especially so at the moment and last year. We accept that some of the rubbish will come from Rockfish, but it's incredibly easy to identify Rockfish as their packaging is branded, while most of the rest of the takeaway food being sold, be it from pubs, restaurants, cafes, takeaways, is not branded. Therefore, if one thing in a pile of rubbish has Rockfish branding, all the rubbish is tarred with being from Rockfish. Now, as we know, currently everyone's selling takeaway food, pasties, beverages, coffees. The Rockfish takeaway doesn't actually sell coffee, so the reference to coffee cups won't be from them. Lots of the references to rubbish from the objectors are written in the current tense. Mr. Burse and Ms. Putt even wrote on the 31st of March that we are currently picking up the rubbish created by Rockfish on a daily basis. Well, that's interesting because the Rockfish takeaway had closed at the end of last year for a refit and didn't reopen until the 15th of April this year. So it wasn't Rockfish rubbish that was being collected. There are, of course, issues with regard to the number of rubbish bins available to all customers eating food and drink from all outlets across Dartmouth, and issues with regard to the behaviour of the public in littering or putting rubbish by bins, plus the well-known seagull activity of pulling rubbish out of bins. No doubt more bin collections and more public bins would help. But fundamentally, the issue is this. The applicant has submitted the 3 proposed additional conditions concerning litter and bins and increasing their own obligations in this regard. The reality is that we don't expect the availability of alcohol will actually increase any of the potential waste being generated by the takeaway. For the reasons already set out, we don't expect to attract additional customers. Those that have been asking for the flexibility of the option to buy a beer are generally already buying a different drink from the range of soft drinks available. So most likely a can of beer will only be replacing a can of Coke, not an increase, just a replacement. The reality is also that my clients do clean up already in the vicinity of Rockfish. The suggestion that they not once have cleared rubbish is exactly that, it's rubbish. Rubbish has also regularly been put in my clients' commercial bins, which until recently they haven't been able to store elsewhere. And frequently that means that rubbish has to be completely resorted because it can't be mixed when collected by the commercial waste companies. My clients' red waste bins along their window have already been moved and will only be put out at night after they've closed for collection in the morning. But my clients frequently pick up other businesses' rubbish and have to dispose of it. But that's not noticed because the waste is unbranded. The fact of the matter is that waste is everyone's problem, and Rockfish do as much to collect other businesses' rubbish as they do. Pretty well every food or drink business in Dartmouth has issues with rubbish and collections. Waste is probably up there with parking and traffic as issues in Dartmouth. Someone's mentioned recycling bins, and my clients would love to be able to provide recycling bins as suggested, and Mitch Tonks will say a few words in a moment about the embankment scheme and their work around some of these areas. The other thing I was going to mention was toilets, but as we've been advised, we don't need to cover toilets, so I won't deal with that. So far as protection of children from harm is concerned, there's only one reference to children tied up with public safety, which I dealt with earlier. So finally, on the subject of the representations, I'd just like to say how welcome it is to see the response of the previous objectors, Councillor Evans and Mr. Bottrell. Both raised very similar concerns to the other representations, but Mr. Bottrell has advised that his concerns have been addressed with the additional conditions which he welcomes, and thanks the licensing authority and the applicant for the work and effort that's been put in to resolve issues. Councillor Evans has also confirmed that he'd like to withdraw his representations subject to the additional proposed conditions. So in summary, I've addressed every single representation. I've explained the very limited purpose of this application for a premises licence for non-late night premises and with a substantial food-only condition to prevent alcohol-only sales. I've explained the additional conditions proposed which have satisfied 2 of the objectors, and I would submit more than address the concerns set out within the representations before you. So for all of those reasons, sir, I would ask you please to grant the application for a premises licence. And finally, just to say, as mentioned within the response to notice of hearing, both Mr. Tonks and Mr. Prowse would like to address you for a few minutes concerning the specific areas mentioned within the response document. Okay. Obviously, in the meantime, I'm very happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Hart. That's greatly appreciated. What I'm going to suggest, actually, members, is that I realise members will have questions for Mr. Hart, and indeed I understand that both sorry, is it Mitch and Matt would like to speak as well. Is it members' preference that perhaps we wait until after the other speakers have spoken to ask questions, or would you like to ask questions now? I don't mind either way, but Councillor Panel?
Yeah, just yes, obviously on the general things, perhaps we wait till later, but on 2 specific things that Mr. Hart mentioned. has he got a definition of what you'd call a substantial meal? Because obviously something like a portion of cheesy chips is a snack to one person, but a substantial meal to somebody else.
Well, that might be something best referred to either Mr. Prowse or Mr. Tonks in a moment, because I would probably need to take instructions on that. I think technically a portion of chips is a substantial meal, and there's been lots of dialogue about this in the media and the press recently in the context of COVID regulations. Whether they would treat it that way, or whether they would require somebody to buy either a piece of fish or one of the other offerings from the takeaway menu with that, I think is a matter for them.
Sorry,
Chairman.
Go ahead. Yeah. And just very briefly, which again might be something that Mr. Tonks wants to answer, but you may be able to help. You said that if the proprietors intended to offer wine, that you're moving down a road to having wine not in glass bottles. So would you be content to have a condition that no glass containers should be used for drinks?
Yes, indeed. And we've actually already offered that with the additional conditions were set out during.
Yeah, I saw that. But it could be ambiguous because you said you were only planning to offer beer at the moment. I just wondered an assurance that.
Yes, so the effect of that condition would mean that nothing could be sold from which it could be drunk. In other words, we couldn't sell a glass of wine or a glass bottle with cider or beer or whatever within it.
You can technically drink from a wine bottle. I've done it myself.
Technically, yes. But I think I would just remind you of the substantial food condition would still apply, and we're still talking about restaurant price alcohol. We're not talking about cheap booze or anything that would perhaps attract the sort of, don't want to be pejorative here, but the sort of person who might drink from a wine bottle is much more likely to go to a shop, I'd suggest, to buy that rather than Rockfish.
Thank you, Mr. Hart.
I'm glad that Councillor Pannell has asked the question about substantial meals, because the phrase in itself gives me horrible flashbacks to last year, which I'd rather not go back over. Councillor Holway, do you have any questions for Mr.
Yeah, I have on the odd occasion come across wine being sold in, I think, 250ml bottles, small plastic 250ml bottles. And I just thought, maybe that's the kind of thing you could consider. Rather than, some young person, I'm not looking at Councillor Brown, of course, but who would be likely to sit and drink a full bottle of wine to themselves.
Yes, sir. It's certainly possible, and wine is sold in the Brixham takeaway in plastic. But at the moment, it's not our intention to be selling wine in Dartmouth. The intention at this stage is simply to be able to have the provision to sell beer.
Right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Holway. Thank you, Councillor Pannell. Mr. Tonks, Mr. Prowse, who would like to speak next? Which one of you would prefer to speak?
Do you want me to?
Yeah, okay, Mr. Tonks, please go ahead.
Really just to say, obviously, we've been operating in Dartmouth for 10 years, Matt and I. We've worked together for 25 years. Chris has covered all the points that we've been experienced in running 27 licensed premises together, from being in the heart of the West End in London right through to Dartmouth. So we're pretty experienced at what we do. Underpinning everything that we've ever done has really been to try and we recognise that making great restaurants is about making great relationships with the community. And everything we also do is underpinned by quality. So the notion that somebody would want to come into Rockfish for cheesy chips and late night beer is just not the type of customer we appeal to. You can't hear me?
You struggling to hear, Councillor Holway?
Sorry?
Councillor Holway, are you still able to hear us?
I thought I was talking then and realised that nobody was.
No, we can hear you, Mr. Tonks, don't worry. But I'm just wondering, because we need to be quorate as well. So, Tom, are you still able to hear us?
I don't know if anyone can hear me, but I think I've dropped out.
No, you haven't, Tom.
You're still there, Tom? Okay. I think Tom has dropped out now. Due to the fact that we need 3 members to be quorate on this meeting, I'm sure that Steve Gardner's probably trying to get Councillor Holway back on the call as we speak.
I'll ring him now, Dan.
Lovely, thank you, Steve. But I just need to pause proceedings for a second, if you don't mind, whilst we get him back on the call. So just taking a pause for a second, if we may. Thank you. So just for the benefit of anybody that's watching this via Facebook or Twitter, Facebook or YouTube, because I know that we are still streaming, we are just pausing the meeting momentarily whilst Councillor Holway rejoins. Hopefully we'll be back with us momentarily.
That's a very American term, Dan.
What is?
Momentarily.
I do apologise, Councillor Panel.
You mean in a moment?
I do mean in a moment, indeed. Are we making any progress, Steve? Maybe he's on the call.
Steve's still on the call,
still
Chairman. Yeah.
Is Chairman, is the member allowed to join us by phone if he can't get through on computer?
Well, considering we're not showing anything, yes. There's no PowerPoint presentation, is there? So unless Mr. Fairburn disagrees, but he's shaking his head. So
that's a fallback then. If we could, so yeah, good.
Okay.
Chair, Councillor Holway's just doing a restart. There's been an issue with his connection, so he's just literally restarting his PC now.
Okay, so it'll be a minute or two before he's back on. Okay, well, thank you all for waiting patiently. These kind of technical errors or technical malfunctions are something we've all experienced over the past 14 months and not unusual, particularly in a rural area like this.
Chairman, would you mind if I use this for a personal needs break while we're waiting?
Please do go ahead, Councillor Panel.
Rather than have to break later, thank you.
Daryl, do you think in order that I maybe adjourn for a few minutes if people do, I mean, whilst we have this opportunity to take?
I think so, Chair. Chance for
Yeah,
short
okay.
adjournment.
Okay, all right. So we'll reconvene at a quarter to 3. Councillor Holloway's back with us. He can make sure that he's on. Yeah, if you wanted to have a 5-minute comfort break, that's absolutely fine. Councillor Holloway, good to have you back with us. We've just agreed to have a 5-minute cut. You're on mute, Tom, but we've just agreed to have a 5-minute break whilst you're rejoining us. So we'll reconvene at a quarter to 2. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Fine. Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened, and we.
No, that's fine. Don't worry. Okay. Well, meeting adjourned for the next 4 minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
Minute or two into it. So if you wouldn't mind starting again with your representation, That would be very useful. Thank you.
Chris has covered most things, but just to reiterate that Matt and I have worked together with 27 licensed fish premises, ranging from being in the heart of the West End through to a lot of our sort of coastline areas that are relatively sensitive. Our business is underpinned on quality seafood. We like to think that our places become good neighbours in the community, as we've proved. We support a lot of local initiatives, and we become, we hope, a member of the community. And Rockfish in Dartmouth, which is our first Rockfish, certainly has been, and the takeaway over 10 years has become somewhere that people in Dartmouth have come to love. And even when we opened the takeaway in the early days, we had the foresight to know that there was going to be a rubbish problem when you open a takeaway, which is why we put the rubbish bins in ahead of anyone saying anything. And on numerous occasions at regattas and various other times, both myself and Matt have been in the street picking up rubbish, because it's not in our interest to run scruffy businesses. We don't want our businesses to be covered with rubbish or to be a nuisance. We recognise that that's not good business. So it's really just a reiteration that we run quality outlets, and some of the representations were made and not something that would happen in our premises. Also, that we've just invested nearly 150,000 in the takeaway there to make it more efficient and to give it a life for the next 10 years. So that's our sort of commitment to Dartmouth too. And more recently, we've been working with South Hams on the embankment scheme, which has been really fabulous, working with council over the last year to help us in our recovery from COVID. And then this year, working with 8 other businesses on the embankment to encourage them alongside us with the support of South Hams to invest in making the licensed area on the embankment something of quite an attraction, national attraction for Dartmouth. So again, we're very much used to trying to be a good pillar in the community. So I hope that helps you reach a decision. If there's any questions, do let us know. And Councillor, we talked about cheesy chips, or you mentioned maybe cheesy chips and a beer. It's just not the business we do. I know takeaways do conjure up that, late night people just want something to eat, but we're all about quality seafood and really just having a beer with it. So that's really why we want to do it.
I wouldn't knock a late night portion of cheesy chips, but I understand where you're coming from. So, right, I have one question, if I may, on the conditions. So, on page, I believe, 2 of the conditions that you've submitted, under prevention of public nuisance 3, you say members of staff will ensure that all litter and waste food generated by patrons in the vicinity of the premises will be collected and disposed of with periodic checks. Would you mind sort of drilling down exactly on what you mean by periodic checks, please?
Shall I answer that? Because
yes, please go ahead.
Because this comes under my little bit that I was going to talk about, is the training and the these kind of checks. We invest in 2 systems that we use alongside all our businesses. One called Trail, which is an online portal, a paperless checklist system. So this will answer your question about the takeaway. We set in motion daily periodic checks throughout the day, incrementally through the day. So for sort of 2 or 3 hour windows, they have certain checks they must complete. And these are used quite highly on the health and safety side and the environmental health side, so our fridge temperatures and so on. Within that, we ask our staff to go and check around the local vicinity of the restaurant, do a clear up, check. And also we can ask for photographs to be taken of the area when they've done it. So this, especially at the end of the night, I think Chris included it in our responses, is there's a photo of at the end of the night, they take a photograph of how they've left the area, and then they close off their day. It's all audited, all there forever and a day to go back and check. That's one of those systems that so everything's paperless. I can see from anywhere at any moment in time how up to date they are with all their checks and so on. And we get a score every day about how well they've completed their daily tasks. It actually makes it much more efficient as a member of staff as well, not having bits of paper.
And that then is something which should be raised as a concern by, say, members of the public or indeed the district council. You can then evidence as this is what was taken, at 5 p.m. on this day. Okay, that's
all time stamped, all data.
Yeah, okay, that's useful. Okay, Councillor Pannell, you have a question.
Yeah, Yes, Chairman, just following up on that. Yeah, the screenshot of trail you showed is only mentions the end of the day, and you've mentioned the emphasis on the end of the day. What assurance have we got that these checks will be done every few hours during the day and monitored to make sure they are being done?
The only assurance we can say is it's part of our conditions, and we're good at following rules and conditions as all licensed premises are. You put a condition in place, we follow the rules. If those are what we call a regular check, I would say it's, you know, it's before opening, it's during lunchtime, it's an afternoon check, it's an evening check, a late night check. Those are the kind of 2 to 3 hours.
So several times a day.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Those are
Thank you. I wasn't sure of that. Yeah,
no, that's the condition. That's what we you know, we're good at following rules of those things. So any other health and safety we'd follow.
Would you be open to, as a condition, if we were minded to grant the license, to setting how many checks you do every so many hours?
Necessary, yeah. I would say it's, you know, probably it would during a whole day. Generally, there is about 4 or 5 periods that we set through the day. Before lunchtime, afternoon, evening, late evening, those kind of.
So that is something we could talk.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're open to all these things. The other platform that we use is alongside the training side of things as a flow training. Again, it's an investment. Everybody across the business completes their induction on there, so they know when they're inducted. Within that, there is a licensing module in there that takes about 2 hours for every front of house to complete. Again, it's time stamped and dated when they've completed it, so they've all been trained in the basics of license trade. They're not a personal license holder at the end of it, but they've got the understanding as you would from any training. So those are all conducted online, and they're tailored to fit our needs for each business. So you wouldn't go teaching someone about hotel license trade when it's a restaurant. Same, you wouldn't do a restaurant if it's just the takeaway they're serving in, but generally it encompasses all the different areas, 6 different areas of licensing that they have to cover before they serve people.
Okay. I guess you're a personal license holder.
I am, yeah.
Yes, and you're in charge.
I'm in charge, and also all our general managers now are all applying for those license holders as well to be a premises. Like it's a bit snarled up at the moment getting their exams taken, but they're all in position to be DPSs as and where necessary as well. So we've got the secondary back, and even down to assistant manager level. It's always better to have that due diligence thing of more than one, you know, experienced license holder in businesses.
Thank you.
Councillor Holway, do you have any further questions?
Well, just to say, Chairman, it's not within our remit to bang people's heads together, but I'm sure some of the people from the neighbouring businesses are watching this online, being streamed. And I would just like to urge everyone to work together rather than in competition when it comes to litter and keeping the place tidy, because, you know, Dartmouth is one of the precious parts of the South Hams. And I think that to enhance the experience of visiting that end of Dartmouth is in everybody's interests. And you know, I'm happy with everything I've heard. I think it sounds good. And if you can work with the owners of the other premises to keep that the best end of Dartmouth, then great.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Holway. I just have one further question. I realise that we've touched quite considerably here on things like waste collection. Again, referring to page 2 of the additional conditions that you set out, you refer under prevention of public nuisance to under point 2, suitable and secure waste containers will be supplied by the licence holder positioned immediately outside the premises. These containers will be taken in at closing time or be kept in a reasonable condition. Would you just be able to clarify what you mean by reasonable, if you could?
I think it's just an overspilling black bag just sat on the pavement is something we wouldn't be doing. It's a nice presented bin that was regularly changed, and that would be my only concern with it is that, you know, some of the complaints about bins there before, replacing them with another bin. It's just finding the right location just outside. I mean, it'd be a lot smaller what we will put out there, but it needs to be presentable. The last thing we want is something unattractive in our shop window. It's just not what we're about.
That's very, thank you for clarifying that. Okay, Councillor Holloway, have you any further questions you should ask the applicants? No. Not Councillor, Mr. Hart. You seem to be trying to come in there, but if you keep it very,
sorry, I just had one comment in answer to add to Councillor Panel's question a short while ago concerning the checks and how we would ensure that they're carried out. And simply to say that I know that the Rockfish Group undergo a quarterly external audit of all of their processes, all of their systems, and the requirements that are, if this license is granted subject to these conditions, the processes or the conditions that are put forward would be subject to scrutiny under that audit. So in other words, what that means is any shortcomings or failings would be picked up by that internal audit rather than waiting for there to be an issue with the council or any of the neighbours. So I just wanted to say that to reassure you that there is that process in place.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Fairburn, hold on, Councillor Powell. Mr. Fairburn wants to come in.
Thank you, Chairman. I think can I just clarify something with either Mr. Tonks or Mr. Hart concerning, it's probably Mr. Prowse, concerning trail and the availability. If the condition were amended so that there was a requirement that the records had to be made available on demand or at the request of the licensing authority, would that cause you any problems? Because at the moment, obviously, of course, it says you're going to do it, but there's no means by which the licensing authority could check and follow that up.
It's all cloud-based, web-based, so it's all sat there accessible. Same thing as an EHO came in and wanted to see our fridge records. They're all there for any day, any period. They're all there, all stored securely.
Okay.
Chairman, if I can butt in, I think Mr. Prowse's idea of someone taking a photo after they've had a check would be really, really useful and a good idea.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Fairburn. But did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Sorry, there was one further thing, and that was concerning condition number 1 on that of the 3 that were put forward as further conditions. Because again, it's a question of understanding what is meant by what measures are sufficient or adequate when they're necessary. It strikes me that you must have a plan or some sort of understanding of what you will be doing to comply with that condition, and it would probably be helpful to the subcommittee if they were to understand what measures you had in mind, and indeed whether they form part of a plan that could actually be approved by the licensing authority as a commitment to it, rather than leaving it as something as vague as is there now. I followed it as a discussion item for you to clarify and help the committee with. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, may I just on the subject of rubbish, I should have mentioned earlier, one of the things that we are trialling in Brixham, we've probably been the first company to try it, is returnable packaging. So one of the things that is an initiative that we're very much behind at Rockfish are our environmental commitments. And for a month now, we've been trialling and gauging how customers feel about returnable packaging, and it's in use here. And we would expect by next summer for all of our restaurants where there is takeaway packaging to revert to a returnable item.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very useful to know. Okay, councillors, any final questions for any of the applicants' representatives here? Councillor Panel?
No, I was going to speak, but Mr. Fairbairn has touched on the same point, and that was we were told about the internal audit, and I wanted to be assured that the system would be open to external audit. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for making those representations. For the benefit of those who are watching this via either YouTube or Facebook, I'd just like to point out that There are no objectors on the call at the moment. We have received objections to this. That's why this meeting is taking place. But there are none on the call at the moment to make their representations in person. But that does not mean that the committee won't consider them when it considers its deliberations. It will do, of course. So with that in mind, what I'd like to do now is adjourn this meeting so that myself, Councillor Holway, Councillor Pannell and Mr Fairburn go into another meeting, and we will return, as the slides said, should this take any, if we've made a decision within 45 minutes, we'll come back to this call and we will tell you of our decision. If it's taken us longer than that, then we will of course return by email. Mr Fairburn, is that you wishing to speak?
Yeah, it's not a residual hand.
Yep.
Should would the applicants like to make a closing submission in terms of summarising their case, because that would be the usual thing at this point.
If they'd like to, I have no objection to it.
Well, so I don't wish to take your time, and given that we have really taken the whole of the hearing in terms of presenting our submissions, I'm not sure that there's much more that I can helpfully assist you
that's
with.
Fine. If that's the case, that's fine.
Well, it's simply just to reiterate my the closing of my original remarks, really, namely that we've addressed all of the representations. I hope that you consider that we have been cooperative and proactive in terms of endeavouring to come up with the additional set of 4 conditions to address the representations that have been made by the objectors. And given that scenario, it would be my submission that those conditions more than adequately address the representations that you have before you. And in those circumstances, I would ask you please to grant the application for a premises licence.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr Hart. Okay, well, in that case, we will now adjourn and to make our decision. Okay. Okay. Right. The committee retired to consider its verdict, and I can announce the following. I've got to read this properly, by the way, otherwise I get in trouble. Having considered what had been said and written by the various parties, and having regard to the statutory guidance and the adopted statement of licensing policy, the subcommittee considered that if the application was to be granted, then it would depend upon there being appropriate and enforceable conditions. The applicant has proposed additional conditions to deal with the representations that have been received. During the hearing, the subcommittee asked about the precision and enforceability of those conditions with the applicant. In light of which, it is considered the application should be granted on the terms applied for, subject to the mandatory conditions, the operating schedule conditions and the additional conditions proposed by the applicant. The additional conditions amended are as follows. Public safety. No alcohol shall be served in a glass container. This is due to the prevention of public nuisance. Members of staff will ensure that all litter and waste food generated by patrons in the vicinity of the premises will be collected and disposed of. Periodic checks, being no fewer than 4 times each day, including one at closing time, will be conducted by staff to enable this to be done. Records of the periodic checks shall be made, and the records shall be made available for inspection by the licensing authority upon reasonable request. All parties have the right to appeal to the Magistrates' Court within 21 days of receipt of written notification of the licensing subcommittee's decision. Finally, at any stage following the grant of the premises licence, a responsible authority or any person may ask the licensing authority to review the licence because of a matter arising at the premises in connection with any of the 4 licensing objectives. I'd just like to ask the applicants if they understand the decision that we've come to.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay. Well, that's it then. Thank you all very much for your time. Thank you to the members and the officers for attending. Thank you to the applicants for making their representations. And with that, I can close the meeting. So, meeting